Okay, good morning, everyone. It is 10 o'clock on February 2nd, 2012. It's time for Open Hours. Again, this week we just released version 3.50 PR2 out into the wild, the second preview release of our upcoming 3.50 release, which is slated for GA in mid-March. And a lot went into PR2, as a lot went into PR1 as well, and so we're going to spend a little bit of time going over it in more detail than just this quick bullet list of some of the changes that are in there. We'll obviously spend more time on some things than others, but just to note that this is a very peace-loving preview release with a bird. And a lot of the important links to follow along with as we're going through this are here on the blog post, which is easy enough to find on GitHub, but is there in the chat if you want it. And so before we go into any gritty detail, the highlights are that we have 3 new components in PR2 that are making their debut in PR2. There's the uploader utility, which is HTML5 based when possible and falling back to Flash if absolutely necessary. And Allen Rabinovich is on the call. He's going to give us a little detail about that. The DataTable refactor finally landed in PR2. It includes as much backward compatibility, well, in terms of feature compatibility, back to 3.4.1 as possible. I'll be filling out some of the backward compatibility, hopefully make it a little bit easier to transition. So far, the folks that have been hitting PR2 have suggested to me that it's been relatively easy to change from 3.4.1 to 3.50, but I do want to hear more feedback about that. We'll go into that a little bit, and then the button utility or widget, or whatever you want to call it, I guess button widget, is introduced in PR2 as well. We've been waiting for this one, and surprisingly complex little bugger, but or at least the problems that were, or challenges that were involved with it are complex for something so simple. And then obviously there's lots and lots of bug fixes and enhancements and things like that to everything, but the app framework got lots of love, which is always nice to see, and the feedback for the app framework has continued to be really pretty awesome. And Eric, do you have confirmation on plan to do any speaking gigs on the app framework stuff coming up?
No, not yet, but I do have proposals out for FluentConf in San Francisco and Backbone Conf in Boston. Unfortunately, the two overlap each other, and they're both the very end of May, I believe, like May 29th through the 31st.
Okay. 29th through the 31st is going to be a very nice weekend, then, I guess. But yeah, so I imagine Eric will be presenting at one of them, and so if you want to see that, I imagine they would be also doing recordings and stuff like that. So if you can't make it in person, they'll likely, maybe they can live stream one into the other. You think they'd go for that? Yeah, maybe not. Okay, so we did push up the history rollup for PR2 up on the GitHub wiki. So it's right here. And we are starting to use the GitHub wiki more for this sort of stuff, so developer-friendly stuff that are for following the status of the library instead of the documentation on actually using the library. And as you can see, it's fairly long. This is a list of all the changes that are in both PR1 and PR2. So 3.50 is looking pretty full already, and so as we go into PR3, the focus is generally in the third preview release to do a lot more stabilization and adding a lot of test coverage and documentation examples and things like that. We're going to be adding in features as well as we are wont to do, because we just like adding in features and stuff. But this is the time that is really of critical importance for the folks that are out there and are looking forward to using the 3.5.0 release when it comes out, to really hit PR2 as hard as you can with against all of your code, so that you can give the feedback that we will be applying those bugs or fixing those bugs, so that when 3.5.0 GA comes out, it's rock solid and it is easy to transition for everyone, not just you. So another petition, please, 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 at least give PR2 a try. If you haven't already, then it's pretty easy to do. All you have to do is change your seed file. So here in, I have it in a fiddle right here. You just point to 3.5.0 PR2 instead of the other one that you were pointing to, and go crazy in your use statement and see what breaks. Hopefully nothing will break. And let us know. We have a lot of channels that we're paying attention to. We have Twitter, obviously. We have the forums. We have IRC. And we want to get the feedback. The things that you like, the things that you don't like, and definitely the things that are broken. We do want to have stuff that's broken go into our bug tracking system. Yeah, so PR2 is really important because this is the opportunity to spend the focus on really stabilizing the code. So the more feedback we get from PR2, the better. Okay, so let's dive into a little bit more detail about some of the things that were in there. And since App Framework is up at the top of the history rollup, Eric, you want to talk about, Eric and Ryan, you want to talk about what went into App Framework for PR2?
Yeah. And you also have a tab there, Luke, that shows the closed tickets. So
yes, indeed.
I think when we just said library code limiting them, all the App Framework tickets went away. Either they weren't assigned the proper place in the library or whatever, but.
Oh, yeah. So Eric did one thing for App Framework, which turned out to be a lot. Yeah. So this 73, that's a good point, actually, to reinforce it. So 73 bugs that were closed, 73 code-related bugs, at least those bugs that were classified as code bugs, were closed in the PR2 timeframe. So where the history roll-up shows everything from PR1 and PR2, this particular report right here, which I'll link to, this just includes code bugs or bugs that were actually slated to code that were checked in the PR2 timeframe. It doesn't include the documentation bugs. There were a lot of those too, something like 30 or 35 documentation bugs as well.
Well, so that's where a lot of work went into the App Framework. Is I was able to get a good bit done on the user guide for y.app, and also get in an example, a fully documented y.app example. And then Ryan was able to document the PJAX component, both the user guide and API docs. So a lot of documentation stuff for the App Framework. Ryan, I don't know if you remember specific code bugs that you might have worked on during PR2.
There are a number of things. Actually, if Luke will scroll down a little bit in the history.
Yeah.
There was, there's a ton of stuff in Router that Eric was working on as well in terms of dealing with all these little cross-browser inconsistencies, and even the really good browsers like Chrome have a lot of quirks when it comes to really new stuff like HTML5 pop state and that sort of thing. So we're still finding little unexplored areas of the new standards that we're working on to squeeze out all the kinks. So there's a lot of improvements there. And then also a lot of smaller bugs for model and model list and view that came in just from people who've been using them and have worked with them for a while now and have feedback about how they've been working and ways that things could work better. And I've got even several more of those on my plate for PR3.
So Ryan, when you're marking the history changes with this exclamation mark, was that to denote?
That means that this change indicates some kind of a deprecation or a back compat change, or something that you'll want to pay extra attention to when upgrading.
Okay. And yeah, there are a few of those in Vue, and definitely router. I mean, obviously router is now controller, so controller.
Those changes there are specifically. All of those actually went into PR1. So if you're already using PR1, there are no new deprecations you need to worry about. But those are around the name change of controller to router and changing various properties to become attributes.
Mm-hmm. And so, Eric, you said that you were working on or have an example for app?
Yeah, so if you go to the staging site and go to the either examples or user guide section, and then, yeah.
This one here?
Yep.
GitHub?
Correct, yep.
Yeah.
So this example is showing using y.app model list in Vue, and what it does is it provides a way to see contributors to GitHub projects. So you can type in a GitHub username, in this case YUI, see the list of repositories that the YUI GitHub user has. You can choose one of them, say like YUI3. And it will show a list of all the contributors and has a little number for the number of contributions they have, which I believe is either commits or something. And if you click on a user, it then allows you to navigate their repositories, kind of like a graph of GitHub contributors.
You can just follow this through and find out what this is all about.
Yeah, and then the back button will work. It's updating the URL as well. It's using the hash-based URLs, and that's just because there's no server-side backing this. So if we were using full path URLs, you would be getting 404s because there's no such thing as YUI library /GitHub/username. So,
yeah, so that's definitely important to note. And that's just a function of, is that the PJAX application or is that router application?
Well, so y.app has a configuration attribute to allow you to configure this type of thing, like it's called the server routing attribute. And in this case, I'm setting it to false, saying that the server can do no routing at all. So that means everything will happen on the client side, and in turn it will also be using hash-based URLs even in Chrome like you're using. So
okay.
My favorite thing about this example, other than the fact that it's just one of the best examples we have, I think. I mean, it's like really it looks great and it's actually useful. And but my favorite thing is how little code it takes. It's surprisingly simple for something.
Yeah, it does look big, but that's because I commented like every single line of code just to try to describe what's going on. But yeah, I think
nice.
there's maybe like
building it up over time.
Yeah, and I actually got some really great feedback from somebody who was using it and saying that it would be helpful to show maybe even like a diagram at the top about how all these pieces are connecting together, which I think is great. So there's still some more things I want to tweak to it to make it better. But.
Yeah, that's true. And just to reinforce the documentation and examples in particular, I know that there have been some people that have been playing with the DataTable gallery preview and and just recently since PR2 launched, they've been doing some DataTable exercises. Todd Smith in particular has been doing some DataTable exercises, and he's been showing them and I think he's sharing them on the forum. But that's the sort of thing that if you have something that you want to put together as an example, really easy to do. We'd be happy to take pull requests with example code in there. And if you have any questions about how to put those together, then we'd be happy to answer them in IRC and things like that. We should put together a tutorial for that, some sort of screencast for how to contribute an example. But, yeah. So this is a fantastic example, and it also ends up being fun to just dig around through different people's stuff.
Yeah, when building it, I actually would catch myself like I was on Facebook or something, the geek version of Facebook, navigating around, looking at projects and stuff.
Yeah,
so that's funny.
Cool.
Yeah, it's everyone should check it out.
Yeah, and this is out on the staging site, which is stage.yuilibrary.com, which is, again, this is the mirror to yuilibrary.com, but it has documentation for the code that represents tip of tree. So what's living out on the GitHub project, the YUI3 project, that includes the documentation, and this is the live version of that documentation. So this is the staging site, what it's going to look like when we flip the switch for 350GA. What you see on staging is going to be what you see on yuilibrary.com. So just to make sure that it's clear, stage.yuilibrary.com isn't frozen for PR2. It follows the tip of tree. So as we add more documentation, then the site gets refreshed. And so if you run into a situation where you're testing against PR2, but the API docs are suggesting that the API docs on stage.yuilibrary.com are suggesting that the API is a little bit different and it's breaking for you, that's probably why. It's probably because we've changed it in head, and you can just ping us an IRC or wherever about that and get clarification, because it might also be that we just have messed up our API docs, and that's actually a bug that we need to know about. So yeah, stage.yuilibrary.com. There's a lot of content going on here. App Framework is obviously introducing app and talks about PJAX. And let's jump back to here. Was there any other stuff that we wanted to talk about? The App Framework changes in PR2?
I don't think so. I think we covered most of them, and basically in PR3 we're going to keep adding to its documentation and keep trying to make the code more solid as we find, like Ryan was saying, little browser inconsistencies, getting those ironed out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can speak from experience having worked with the model and model list APIs when integrating them with DataTable, that it's really nice to have that have the consistent API coming from model and model list. Understanding that, I think that those objects in the system, those components, are a really good fit for use in DataTable, and so all of the work that goes into model, like for the model sync layer and things like that, can be leveraged for DataTable syncing, because that in particular was one of the most requested features from YUI2 DataTable, is being able to edit data and send it back up to the server. And with and how to write that code was always sort of not well defined, not well documented, and there wasn't a lot of convenient integration points for doing that. It was all sort of up to you to do that. But now that template exists in models sync implementation, or the sync implementation that you add for your model classes, and DataTable can take advantage of that, and any other class can take advantage of that, and it becomes a nice consistent way for you to have that relationship on the client back to the server. And it, in a couple of hours yesterday, I added in a couple of hours yesterday, I added the ability for add row and remove row and those sorts of things in DataTable to also trigger a call into the sync layer of the underlying model and model list, and so, or underlying model, I guess. So if you have your sync layer set up for your models that you're going to be using or representing in your data table, then boom, there you go. You have your CRUD for your data table, and it was really easy to do that. And it didn't really occur to me until actually afterwards in the evening that, hey, in a couple of hours I just added into core something that's been really, really wanted for a long time. So hopefully that works out. And let's talk about Uploader now, I think. We can move on from App Framework into Uploader.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Allen Rabinovich is on the line. He is the person that put together the Uploader. Do you have anything to show, Allen?
I do.
You want me to?
I do, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Let me share my computer screen.
To install a plugin or something?
And restarted, so yay for Adobe Connect. Give me just 1 second so that I can actually adjust this. Alright, let's try this again. Is there a way to pick a screen I want to share? Yes, there is. How about main display? Which display can you guys see?
Wow. I see the count punching. Who is that?
Yeah, that's the wrong display. Oh, come on. Apparently that's not what is meant by main display. Let's try that again. Alright,
good
you should
question
now...
in chat. What's the state of tree view?
Yeah, so while we wait for Allen to get set up with Uploader, there's a question in chat about what the state of tree view is for 3.5.0. At this point, it's looking like tree view will not be in 3.5, and there is an outside chance that that's going to happen. We're evaluating the state of the code right now, and where it is. It doesn't feel like it's had enough public exposure in the development cycle for 3.5 that we would feel comfortable with releasing it as a component.
Yeah,
even a
it's most likely going to be in PR1 in 3.6. Just from what I know. We will be looking at it later today, though. We have a couple hours allocated later today, so we'll have more information.
Yeah, and to clarify the reasons for that, because I know that I think we had forecasted it was going to be in 3.4 as well, and it's kind of slipped for a while. It's not actually being developed by a core team member, and so this is somebody else at Yahoo who has like a day job, and this is like something that he's going to contribute to the library. So it's kind of challenging to, he only has so much time to work on it, and so that raises a lot of challenges.
And then another question from Todd is the issue of why.buttons.on versus button.getNode.on resolved. I chatted with Derek Gathright yesterday about this, and we came to some resolution. So it will just be the button instances on method will relay DOM events automatically and handle its own specific custom events. So there's basically a custom on method for buttons, but it won't be getNode.on in order to deal with events. It should be more transparent API or more intuitive API as you would expect it to be.
All right. So before I talk about the uploader, I wanted to mention that there's also the Nightskin movement that Jeff Conniff has been working on, which is the second skin for the the YUI 3 modules, and it was introduced as part of 3.4, and it's being expanded greatly as part of 3.5. So this is actually on YUI library right now, describing the night skin so you can see what it looks like. And there's also a new syntax, a simplified syntax for specifying the skin. So if you look at the option B in this documentation, you'll see that you can now pass a very simple parameter with a skin name to the YUI config. And yeah, Ryan just posted the link into the chat, so if you want to check this out.
I didn't know about that new config. That's awesome.
Yep, so it's really cool. So yeah, so that's the skinning story, and night skin is basically, I think it's going to cover all of the modules, the UI modules in 3.5, I believe. So
yeah.
Okay, so let's jump on to the uploader. So uploader has been part of YUI since YUI 2, has a long history, and it's been entirely Flash-based. Essentially, we were taking advantage of Flash's ability to upload multiple files, well, to select multiple files, and then to upload a few at a time simultaneously, and report back on the progress of the uploads and the data that was received back from the server, something that wasn't really possible in sort of regular standard HTTP protocol and in the original spec for the XHR. It has become possible in XHR level 2, and a lot of the browsers, the new round of browsers, I think starting with Firefox 3.6, Safari 5, and Chrome, I don't remember which version, 11,322, I don't know. They have made this new method of uploading files using XHR level 2 available. And so we've decided to make that, because that's kind of a standard browser way that doesn't use any plugins or any third-party modules, third-party controls. We decided to make that the primary method for the uploader, because it essentially implements almost almost all of the features that Flash has given us, and in fact it has some extra features, but it's lacking in other ways. So the uploader was basically split into two separate modules, and the top level module is just a dynamic alias that assigns itself to one or the other depending on the features available in your browser now. So let me just show you quickly. This is a very simple manual test page. So this is the HTML5 uploader. So you know, this button is just a button. If I hit select files, I get file selection. You know, I can select multiple files in this dialog box. I get upload, and I get data back from the server. This is right here is the Flash uploader. So you'll notice that this isn't actually a button. There's a Flash overlay in it, and I'll get into why that's the case. This has been the case with the Flash uploader in previous versions, and why we have to do it this way. But the behavior is identical, except the dialog box is shifted to the other monitor. So let me pull it up. Can do exactly the same thing. Open it, hit upload files, get the files uploaded, get the data back from the server. Same exact story.
Alan, can you show the implementation code for that?
Yeah. So what do you mean by the implementation code?
Inside your use statement, your instantiation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was going to do next. So actually, the cool thing about it, let me pull up a bit.
Alan, I just have a quick question.
Yep.
When you, on the Flash version, when you clicked the select button, did it turn blue?
No, it didn't, and I'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to get to that. It's a very good question. Let me just show what Luke asked for first, and then I'll get to that. So if we go to tests, manual, so we have let's do the HTML5 uploader implementation first. So here it is. You use uploader HTML5. You create a new instance of it. You specify where you want to render the select files button, and I'll explain why it's a widget as opposed to just, you know, a generic utility module in a second, and that specifically has to do with Flash. And then you set some parameters if you want to upload, you know, if you want to select multiple files at a time, if you want to append new files. And then you listen to some of the events. So when the file list changes, you display the files that are available, just in a little bit in the little output box below. And then when you have progress complete, you report on the individual file's progress. And then when you have total upload progress, which is actually a new event, this is a convenience event that we're providing with this new version of the uploader. It tells you the total upload progress. Before, it was up to the developer to essentially determine what the total upload progress is. We're making it easier. And then when all uploads are complete, there's also a new event for that. So yeah, and then the upload button just initiates the upload. So this is the HTML5 uploader instantiation code. The nice thing about it is that the Flash uploader instantiation code is exactly the same. So the API for them is identical, except a few things that that are different, and that just has to do with the feature parity between Flash and HTML5, and I'll explain what those are. So first, let me get back to the this question of Eric's whether the button turned blue or not, and that delves into that further point that I mentioned, is why is the uploader a button in the first place? Why is it not just a utility that you call open file dialog method on and be done with it? So the issue is with Flash, and the issue is with Flash as of version 9. Adobe decided that it is a security issue that a UI input that does not go directly to the Flash player can cause the file select dialog to open. So they've required the user input to be produced directly in an instance of a Flash player in order for the file dialog to appear. And this has been true as of Flash Player version 9 and above, which basically has the majority penetration. And so essentially, before, in early versions of YUI 2, Uploader was exactly that utility that you can just call a method on. But as of Flash Player 9, we essentially had to make the Uploader a button, a Select Files button, because we had to create a transparent Flash overlay on top of it to essentially make sure that the user input goes into Flash instead of going into JavaScript and being passed to Flash, because that would not allow the file select dialog to be open. So because of this legacy, right now the easiest way to extend it while keeping the Flash compatibility in place and also providing the HTML5 layer on top was to turn Uploader into a widget. And so what Uploader actually does, specifically, well, both Flash and HTML5 Uploader, is it allows you to specify, let me actually pull this up here, it allows you to specify what the underlying select files control is. So by default, it's just a simple button, and this is obviously going to be a template. Right now it's just inline. But by default, it's just a simple HTML button. But it can be anything, including our CSS button, for example, the new CSS button. And then what it does is it latches on to the, in case of HTML5 Uploader, it latches on to the click event of that control in order to open the Select Files dialog. In case of the Flash Uploader, it actually creates a dynamic transparent overlay on top of that control and grabs the and basically, that way the UI activity goes directly to Flash. Now, what we are doing is Flash is actually going to be broadcasting all of the mouse events that happen with it. So mouse, hover, a mouse over, mouse out, mouse down, mouse up, and click. And so whatever control you use, you will actually be able to replicate state changes if you actually want the button to change state in response to the mouse events. Otherwise, all of those events are going to Flash, but we are going to be broadcasting them out. I don't think that's part of the PR2, but that is going to be in the final version in PR3. I'm not sure exactly yet how that's going to be implemented, because simulating those events on that control may not be the ideal way, so it might just be that Flash will broadcast those events, and it will be up to the developer to pick them up and simulate state changes on their custom select files control as they deem necessary. Anyway, but so that's the issue with the UI, and I think this is sort of the most elegant way, given what we have to deal with Flash, to resolve this issue and make it sufficiently universal. eventually, when we drop support for Flash, we'll be able to go to an uploader utility where you don't actually have to create, where you can create completely custom UI for yourself and never have to worry about this particular select files button. But this is sufficiently easy, right? Because you're going to have ostensibly a select files button anyway, so this allows you to dynamically configure it however you want to.
And
so
this
that's
is also and this is also a conditional load setup, so you just use uploader and you'll get the right one for whichever client.
Right, so right now actually in PR2 it loads both, but I am going to have conditional loading implemented. Right now it's just an alias that checks some values, and but it requires both HTML5 uploader and Flash uploader right now. Well, the Flash file, which is really the biggest chunk of the whole thing, will only load if the Flash uploader is used, because that's loaded, in a separate request. But yeah, the code themselves will also be, the individual uploaders will also be dynamically picked.
Right, but the API, in terms of that's the implementation detail, but at the API level, that's not going to change from PR2 to 3.0 at this point, right?
Oh, the API, yeah, the API is basically said. There will be some additions that are not implemented yet. So let me talk a little bit about what we've changed about the implementation, because things have actually been changed. So first of all, we pulled out the queuing logic, the upload queue, automatic queuing and uploading individual files out of Flash. It was completely in Flash and therefore non-transparent to the JavaScript developer. So all of that got pulled out, and there's actually a new helper class called uploader queue, which manages an upload queue and has a lot of nifty tools that allows you to stop and start uploads. So if you wanted to temporarily stop for whatever reason. It also allows you to automatically re-upload files if there has been an error, and you get a choice of whether to re-upload an errored out file immediately or wait until all the other files are uploaded. It also has the convenience of, like I mentioned, in addition to individual progress events from individual files, it does all the computation for you for the total progress. So what the entire file queue, yeah. So that's the uploader queue, and now it's completely transparent to the JavaScript developer because it's all in JavaScript. So basically, all of that logic was pulled out of Flash, and it's used. Uploader queue is used identically by the HTML5 uploader and the Flash uploader. It's the same implementation for both. In addition to that, we also created this file wrapper, which has a dual nature. It either acts as a wrapper around the file type, which is introduced as part of the HTML5, and what allows us to actually append files to the XHR requests. And that file type, it's not actually constructible in JavaScript, but you can get references to it from an input file dialog or from a drag and drop of files onto the browser. So this y.file acts either as a wrapper around that file type, or it acts as a wrapper around a file reference in Flash. And in that case, it needs, when you create an instance of Y file, you pass it which instance of uploader Flash you're working with, and then it can interface with that instance of uploader and manage that file reference. So from the point of view of the developer, again, this is, they have all of the methods of managing the file exposed here. And I personally have great hopes for this module, because it has a variety of applications. One of them is we'll extend it to allow for local file access, so you would actually be able to look at the content of the file. The sort of on the server side, once this gets into Node.js, it can be extended to deal with a file system on the server level and provide all of the conveniences of working with files in the file system. So this is just the beginning. For now, it just has the functionality relevant to the uploader. So it has the upload method, which picks what to do depending on whether it's working with Flash or HTML5. It produces all of the individual upload events and so on. So So that's also new. This y.file, and you can basically implement the uploader if you didn't want to deal with our module at a very basic level, just using y.file and working with its own upload methods, or you can use just the uploader queue and implement it that way. So all of these modules allow you to construct a much more granular implementation of file uploading than you were able to before with Flash, even though Flash is still part of this. Let's see, what else? So, yeah, so one thing I didn't get to in PR2, but it is part of my PR3 lineup, is the drag and drop. So one way to get files into the browser with HTML5 is to drag and drop them onto a specific element, and so we'll allow you, there's actually a placeholder for it, which is empty right now, but you'll be able to specify just a node as a drag and drop area, and then when files are dragged and dropped onto that node, they will be picked up by the uploader and pulled into the file list, which allows you to, not just have a dialog, a select files dialog, but also just pull files directly from the file system. So this is one particular place where the APIs are different. Flash cannot do drag and drop for files, so that's not going to be part of the Flash uploader. But it is, if you're just using uploader, the setting of this parameter will just simply be ignored. So in some sense, it's just graceful degradation. There's no, there's no harm, no foul. You're just not going to have a drag and drop area. So that's this will be in PR3. The other interesting kind of idea that came up that is not going to be in 3.5, but it is planned for 3.6, is actually resumable file uploads. So with HTML5, because you can read files locally and absorb them as essentially blob data, you can actually split them into chunks and upload individual chunks. So I think that for us, that solution might be to also have a server-side component module that will deal with discerning how much of a file has been uploaded and then telling the client-side piece to upload the rest. So something of that sort. It's not very clear-cut yet. But that's something that I'm definitely going to look at in 3.6, especially since we have internal interest in resumable file uploads. And that's a really powerful idea to be able to do that. And HTML5 certainly allows that. So
all the same, getting the uploader feature in the file the file API is interesting, and it's kind of exciting for the future for the implementation on the server. And seeing that, I'm not sure necessarily there would be a lot of code reuse involved in that from client to server implementations, but at least you would be coding against the same API, right?
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty awesome. So in terms of the drag and drop not working in Flash or not working for Flash, that is something that if you are implementing an interface, if the developer is implementing an interface that does support drag and drop, there's likely to be some UI that suggests that they can drag and drop onto a particular area to do a file upload. So that is definitely something to be aware of, that if they are relegated to a browser that is not capable and is stuck in Flashland,
right,
that the UI will have to adjust to not tell a story about functionality that isn't supported because of the Flash situation. So
right.
Would there then be a convenient way to determine if you are in Flash mode or you are in HTML5 mode?
That's actually a good question, because as you were talking about that, I was thinking, yeah, well, how would one do that? Well, so the uploader becomes an alias either for HTML5 uploader or Flash uploader. Let me pull up both. I think there needs to be some kind of just a test or a property you can easily check. I don't think one has been implemented yet, but it should be fairly easy to have some kind of just a check method that allows you to check which uploader you actually got.
Yeah, I guess in the case where there's some API that simply isn't supported from one to the other, then definitely having some way to check from which version you
Yeah,
want.
but it would be. I think it would be more reasonable to just have a straight up am I Flash or am I HTML5? What am I doing?
Yeah.
I see a question from Foxtrot in the chat about I/O. So I/O has actually been updated to use the capabilities of XHR level 2. It now allows you to pass form data as a parameter to the upload, which allows you to populate it with files and so on. So if you used it a while ago, then yeah, you wouldn't have been able to do it. Now you will be able to do that in I/O. That is part of the part of this update. Yeah.
Yay. Cool. Well, thanks for the rundown, Alan. And so that's Uploader. And any final notes to add about Uploader, or?
Yeah. If there are any questions, shoot questions at me. Otherwise, yeah, I think I'm done talking.
Cool. All right. Well, we have a lot more. I'm going to steal control of the screen. Oh, wait.
Okay.
Quick question.
Yes.
While we wait in chat. So after this question, we'll transition back to PR2 overview, and we'll talk about the DataTable implementation in PR2, what features are there, and state of the documentation, and what you'll need to know when you adopt or migrate from previous versions of DataTable.
In the future, do you suppose you can bring in Browser Plus support in so Uploader can compress and concatenate the files? So I haven't looked at Browser Plus support. I think that it's a question we've thought about of actually sort of modifying file content, and we've gotten a lot of requests for it in various incarnations of that. Image uploaders usually ask us, can we resize the image down and then upload it? All of these things are, to some extent, possible, and I will definitely be looking at that. I think that's part of the expansion of the file API to actually be able to massage and manipulate files. I don't know about Browser Plus support. That is completely new territory for me, so I don't have a clear yes or no for you in that regard. But we'll definitely be looking at being able to manipulate the file content before uploading it in some manner, whether it's resizing images or potentially compressing everything into a single, a single chunk and so on. The problem, generally the problem with that is that it's like putting all your eggs in one basket. If the upload fails, then all of a sudden, you've lost 100 files instead of 2 or 1. So that's something that's potentially just not ever a good idea. But anyway, yeah, I'll look at Browser Plus, but I haven't looked at it enough yet.
Alan, I just have a quick question about what if a browser doesn't support HTML5 file uploading or Flash, like say iOS?
Right.
Is there going to be a way to signal that?
Well, so right now, yes, that's actually one of the PR3 tasks is to complete the graceful degradation. Right now, it degrades from HTML5 to Flash, and then it doesn't go anywhere else. So that's part of the finishing touches. But it would be up to the developer to decide where to go next if they have a a specific thing in mind that they want to replace that with, maybe like a dynamic, kind of what a lot of mail apps do, like add another file and it dynamically adds another field to the form, or just uses the same field and dynamically uploads it. But at that point, we're kind of just saying, that's your move from there on.
Cool.
Hello?
All right.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was getting disconnected again.
Oh.
Okay, so do you want to steal control, Luke?
Yeah.
Okay.
Stop sharing. All right. So the last thing in the docket is DataTable refactor. Oh, actually, let me talk briefly about button. I can't speak as authoritatively about button, the state of button, as Derek could, but he had another meeting, so he couldn't participate here. Incidentally, his meeting was about buttons, so, or maybe about scroll view. I'm not sure. I think it was about button actually, but. So there was Todd. You raised the question earlier about the event API for subscribing to events from it. So there was some awkwardness there where button. Oh gosh, where is a good? I guess I don't really have a good thing to show, but we have a button page. Yes, we do. Okay, so right now the user guide that's out on stage. We added the getNode API method to button instances when you're creating a button. So getNode basically returns the source node, is my understanding. And then, but there was some confusion about the API for subscribing to events on the thing, and due to the event system, the way the event system is wired up, it becomes difficult to inject special behavior into the subscription lifecycle, but then relay some subscription stuff through without getting something wrong or missing something. It can be prone to bugs and some fragility. So the immediate workaround, which is the case in PR2, is that in order to do DOM subscriptions, you do have to call the buttons.getNode and then do on clicks and things like that from the node itself that's underlying the button. That's kind of lame. We think I think we all agree that that's kind of lame. So we are actually tackling that little beast, and it will for PR3 and GA. It's going to be button.on and click, and we're just going to deal with the hairiness of relaying through certain events through to the DOM system, and other events handled specifically for the buttons custom event implementations. But again, that's not currently in PR2. If you're using button, then please work with button, stress button, and give us any feedback on what you find and any implementation challenges or performance issues that you find. Button is one of those interesting problems where it's so close to an actual HTML control that the mental model that surrounds working with buttons is different than working with something like a calendar control, where you can it's easier to encapsulate that concept as a separate thing that's devoid of the DOM itself. Whereas a button, you think, well, there's a button in the DOM, and so it feels like you're working with a node. But similar to working with a calendar, when you're working with a calendar, it doesn't necessarily feel like you're working with a node. It feels like you're working with some sort of widget. So that changes how the psychology of creating that API is concerned. So the long story short, the getNode thing is going away. I don't know if getNode itself is going away. It might, in support of just get, the string source node, like it is for every other widget. But at least that API for doing event subscriptions will be made more convenient. So there is some user guide out there for button, and out on staging we've got a couple of examples showing the difference between CSS buttons, button instance, and button groups. I'm particularly interested to get feedback on button groups, so if you want to check that one out, there's this example here to show the checkbox button group and radio button group and the way those things interact. And check those out and give us some feedback. And I'm running a little bit low on time, but I do want to cover DataTable stuff. So I'm going to transition into DataTable stuff now. There's a lot to talk about, but I've covered a lot of it in previous open hours. So what I want to focus on is what is in PR2, what's the state of the API. DataTable with an E. Okay. So The DataTable refactor did land in PR2, and that includes some new APIs that weren't there in 3.4.1 and some other features that weren't there in 3.4.1, and some backward compatibility breakages. So it does have a new API. I'm trying to maintain some backward compatibility, but what it basically comes down to for transitioning from a 3.4.1 table to a 3.5.0 table is that instead of using y.datatable.base, you just call y.datatable. And instead of passing column set and record set, you're passing columns and data. And that's a long discussion for why those names were changed. But I do actually support a column set attribute and a record set attribute. They are in PR2, although I think that they're not entirely working right now. So I'll get those patched up for 3.5.0 GA to at least be less surprising for people that are migrating from 3.4.1. But generally speaking, the only thing that you really need to change for your basic data table is you don't have to construct a y.datatable base, and change column set to columns, and change record set to data. Otherwise, the syntax for instantiating a data table, what you pass into the columns is the same. What you pass into the data collection, or formerly record set, is the same if you're passing in an array anyway. You can pass in an array of data. So in this case here, an array of objects like we had before. And the user guide now includes a lot of inline code snippets with live examples. And I'll be filling this out, including a migration guide, hopefully by the end of this week. So if you're watching this video instead of participating on the call live, then that might already be in place. So the column configurations, these are no longer turned into instances of a class column internally, and the column set is no longer turned into an instance of column set internally. It's just working with raw objects, which makes this a very, which makes this a convenient way to put additional configurations in here for formatters, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the column configurations, you can go into any detail in the column configurations, replacing the column string names with column configuration objects, using a key to be what that, to bind this data to the data in the data model list. That's another change that I should say explicitly, I suppose, is that column set went away in terms of just a raw object, but record set was formerly pointing to an instance of class record set, which still exists in 3.5. We might explore deprecating it in favor of model list. But DataTable now under the hood is using model list and model. So that means that all of the work that Eric and Ryan and everyone else in the community is feeding back on, and the pull requests that go into model and model list, you get to take advantage of those in DataTable as well. So so there's, in terms of features, we have sortability is in there. Don't mind the flipping arrows. That was a bad UI decision on my part. We've already fixed that. Let's see. We have nested headers like we had before, and formatters I talked about in the last open hours about having string formatters, function formatters, and node formatters, and the distinction between those. This is also included in documentation, and you can do different things with those. In general, avoid node formatters unless absolutely necessary. And the DataTable data source module has been patched to work with the new DataTable API. So if you're getting data remotely using the DataTable data source API, right now that works as is. You don't have to change anything, and the API for doing that is the same. So you're still going to plug your data source with a schema and plug your DataTable instance with the DataTable data source, and then call render, call load, those sorts of things. And so that isn't changing. But if I have time in PR3, and if I don't, then it'll go into 3.6. My plan is to have the data attribute support an object that describes the data source and the schema that would be applied to the data source, so that you can just put all of the configuration for how you're getting your remote data in the DataTable instantiation itself. So that should make it a lot simpler. But in the meantime, what worked before will continue to work, and that's important to note. So column sorting. Sortable, I expanded the API a little bit. So I will go into more detail about this in the user guide, but right now the API docs actually have more detail about the sorting API. But for the cases where you want the entire table to be sortable, all columns to be sortable, you don't have to pass sortable true in your columns. You just set sortable. You can set the sortable attribute of the table to true, and it'll just turn all of them on. False will turn them all off. And a feature that was oft requested in the 2x time frame was, or it was confusing anyway, a lot of folks in the forum asked about this. If you send in data into a table and you specify a sort by configuration, it will pre-sort your data for you before it displays. And when you add records into it, and this is courtesy of model list, if you add records into the table, it will insert them into the proper place according to the current sort order. If you modify data in the table, it will move that record to its proper place in the sort order if the current sort affected that. Scrolling in PR2 is one thing that's still a little wonky. It's implemented for Y, X, Y, and X, and it now supports captions for those that wanted captions with your scrolling tables. It now supports captions. And the API, similar to the API with sortable, you just specify a configuration. If you use the DataTable scroll module, then you can just specify scrollable Y, scrollable X, or scrollable XY. And then you specify height and width. Now, two things that I want to get feedback on about the scrollable implementation is that there's logic in the scrollable API, the scrollable logic right now. I'm sorry, for Y scrolling tables. That is, if you have tables with a vertical scroll bar that's scrolling tables, the common idea of a scrollable data table. And you don't have enough data in there that warrants it to scroll, then it's not going to split the table up into a scrolling situation. It's just going to render the table statically as a single table. If you go over that, if the table dimensions exceed the boundary of your configured height, then it will split it into a scrolling table at that point dynamically for you, and that it monitors data changes and column changes and things like that. I want to get verification from folks in the field if you think that that's over-engineering, if you think that that's potentially adding too much complication into it, or might be fragile or something like that. Then let me know. Otherwise,
I had one question related to that.
Sure.
Is the scrolling feature going to be where you might do something, say if I had a table with 1,000 records, there could be some optimization there where they're not all rendered to the DOM unless they're actually visible within like the area that the table is displayed, or the scrolling part of the table is displayed. So I was wondering if there was any thought there on to effectively lazily render rows of the table when they could actually be seen by a user.
there is thought, yes. I do want to do that. That's not going to be in the 3.5.0 implementation. So right now the baseline is to render what's there. It will be slow. It won't be as slow as it was in 3.4.1 because the new implementation doesn't render liner divs. So you're drawing half the DOM. But yeah, if you're creating a table with 1,000 records, it's creating 1,000 models and it's creating 1,000 rows. So yeah, that's going to suck. And for that, we'll be getting pagination. There's risk of pagination falling out of 3.5.0 at this point. I'm going to be working on getting the pagination API into the gallery in the meantime. So come 3.5.0 GA, there will be pagination of some sort. It might just need a gallery prefix.
Yeah, I guess any optimization work that happens with model list in 3.6, you would be able to leverage and build on top of with like this idea of only rendering rows when you need them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
Yep. I concur. Before everybody gives me a bug on this, the scrolling data table implementation, yes, the columns are out of alignment. And I'm going to fix that in PR3. But obviously not for X scrolling tables. But for Y scrolling tables, they're out of alignment right now, and that's one of the priority things to get for PR3. But I just wanted to get that feature out there so that at least you can do functional evaluation from 3.4.0 to 3.5.0 migration. And let's see. What else? There are new APIs that are coming in. We're a couple minutes over, but fortunately our meeting got canceled. Oh, yeah. So this was just added. Let's see. I'll add apples and carrots. And let's see if this works. No, well, it was a shot in the dark. Well, okay, I'm not going to spend time debugging. But, so the basic instantiation looks...
the first div on the page, which may not be visible in the
right.
results area.
Yeah, I mean, I can just do this. Damn it. There we go.
Yeah, there's a comment from Victor in the chat, Luke, asking if you would do a YUI blog post on how you were able to leverage model and model list to...
Yeah, that sounds good. That content will probably also be in the DataTable user guide as well, but that's certainly a good idea. I could do that as well. Okay. Anyway, so let's assume that we have a table that isn't broken, and then add in some additional configurations. So let's say I want to make the entire table sortable. True, that's it. It's now sortable. All columns are going to be sortable. If I want it to be scrollable in one direction, let's say Y scroll, vertical scrolling, I'll specify the axis to scrollable, and then I'll also need to specify the height limitation. So this is CSS declaration there. And let's say I want to have the apples column be 150 pixels wide. Back. And that is that. The width implementation goes through the column widths, the call group and call elements, which the HTML table width declaration, width calculation for columns is incredibly complicated. And so if it ends up being 150 pixels or less, then don't be surprised, because it doesn't truncate content automatically. If you have content that's longer than 150 pixels, it's going to expand the cell to fit the content. I'll work on getting column widths that are absolute column widths that truncate content in the future. But there's actually documentation in the API docs for the column widths module, that describes how you can implement an absolute width if you want. So let's see. So a specified height for a scrollable table, and now so the latest feature is for if I want to use. Oh, maybe I wonder if that's the problem. That was a hint to myself. How about that? So data table mutable, for example. The data table mutable module then adds APIs. I wonder if I have wrong syntax or something like that. Add row, and I'm going to specify apples here. Appearance bar. Blah. Okay, so that's going to add a row to the table in the appropriate insertion place. But I can also remove some of this tab indexing here. So add a config. Oh, nice. Thank you so much for auto doing that for me. I can add in an additional configuration to add row sync true, which is now going to insert a row into the table, and it's going to call into the data table's models sync layer automatically to send that add row, the new row of data back to the server. So if I have a special model that I am implementing, my model class goes right there in the configuration, and now whenever this data goes in, the data from your data array will populate instances of my model class. So if you have some synchronization logic, some server sync to go on, or even local server sync or client-side sync or something like that. So you can implement the synchronization layer in your model, pass in that model type into the record type, and now calling sync true with your add row will go through the sync layer implemented in your record type. But to make things a little bit easier, if it is your intention to have a fully mutable table, auto sync true. And now add row will go automatically into the sync layer. Okay, that's the last addition that I put in, and that came in actually a couple of days after PR2, but it did make it into the gallery module. I am still maintaining the gallery data table 350 preview gallery module, and that has been updated since PR2 with the autosync functionality in response to some feedback I got in the YUI channel. So in case I haven't pimped the YUI channel enough, it works. You should try it. And I think I'm going to call it at that. We did go a little bit longer today, and I appreciate everyone sticking around. But PR2, that's a summary of PR2, some highlights of some of the things that are in PR2. 350 is rounding out to be quite a massive release, and it's going to be pretty epic when it comes out, and I am looking forward to that day, boy. Mid-March is the release time for 350. There's going to be one more preview release, and again, please hit PR2 with as much as you can. Give us the feedback, as much feedback as you can. Try it out in your local code bases, see what breaks. Let us know what bugs you find so that we can make 350 GA as rock solid as possible. And if you have any questions about adding an example, if you want to add an example for us as we go, then hit us up in the forums and the IRC channel, and we'd be happy to help you out with that. So anybody else have anything to say before we sign off for the day?
I don't think so. It's been fun.
All right. Okay, so we will see you again maybe next week, maybe the week after. We'll send out an YUI blog post invite for the next open hours. So for Eric Ferraiuolo and Allen Rabinovich, Ryan Grove, and all of the rest of us, thanks for calling in, and we'll talk to you soon.